Jeff and Alyssa Bethke came from two very different backgrounds. But as they reached adulthood, they both started to wonder if they'd been duped about love, dating, and sex. And now, after learning some tough lessons, they're telling others about how they found a better way forward. Take a look.
Jeff and Alyssa Bethke have been happily married for 5 years. But before they met, Jeff had a distorted view of relationships, and Alyssa had never held a guy's hand.
We're infected with this disease of fake love, of a bad view of love, of lies we believe about sexuality and marriage, and it's killing us.
In their new book, Love That Lasts, Jeff and Alyssa offer lessons from their own personal successes and failures and present a realistic option for love, dating, and marriage.
And they're here to talk about it. Jeff and Alyssa Bethke are with us, and we welcome you to the program.
Thanks for having us.
Jeff, you just said that we've been infected with this disease of a bad view of love. What's our bad view?
I think primarily we've turned love into something selfish, something about taking and something about, what can I get out of it? Rather than if you look at Jesus, who shows us what love is like, it's for him all about giving and sacrifice. And I tell this funny story in the first chapter of, it's kind of like this, I tell this funny story of my first flat tire I ever got. Now, when I got it, it just kind of felt like almost like my emergency brake was on. It just kind of, I was dragging, but I didn't think it was a flat tire because the movies made it sound like, you're going to spin out, there's going to be an explosion, there's going to be fire. And so I just kind of kept going, and it actually ruined my car over time, because when you drive on a flat tire, it really hurts.
Over to the side.
Exactly, it really hurts the car. And so I use that as a funny analogy to kind of talk about that's a lot of us with our distortions of love, sex, marriage, and dating right now is because our lives aren't just exploding in the minute we make a bad decision. It just kind of feels like maybe we're dragging. We don't realize that God actually has something more for us, and we weren't meant to drive on that flat tire.
Well, and sometimes I think the world presents such a skewed picture of the perfection God intended. You wound up being influenced by porn at an early age when you were very young, and that impacts you for years to come.
Yes, and that's what we talk about too. We're kind of in this almost social experiment right now with the digital age of, our generation was one of the first generations that grew up native to the internet, meaning like we don't know a time before it, right? I've heard about fax machines, but I've never seen one, right? And so we talk about that, of how that's actually having deep ramifications of this ubiquitous nature of information and internet, and it sometimes is kind of hurting us.
That no one's really understood the total impact of until just recently, really. Alyssa, you, on the other hand, grew up in church and were part of the True Love Waits movement, and that impacted you as well.
Yeah, it did. I think I had seen what the culture was doing, and I knew I didn't want to do that, and I wanted to do what God wanted the best for me. But at the same time, I think I made a lot of decisions then out of fear, because I was so fearful of losing my virginity or whatever it may be, that I just got so fearful where I couldn't even talk to a guy unless I was like, oh, do they think I love them? And just there was some things that weren't healthy there either.
Well, there are often these perfectionistic things that fall upon us that give us that kind of fear. And with that, you kind of fell into an addiction of your own for a season of time anyway with food.
Right. I had an eating disorder for about 6 years, and it started with, I would say, I so longed to have a boyfriend and to have someone pursue me, and I saw my friends dating and no one was coming after me. And then I would look around and be like, oh, everyone that is dating, they look this way. So I need to be a certain size. And so it just started, and it eventually became more of a control issue. When something wasn't going on in my life that I could control, I turned to that. But it was hard.
So talk a little bit, if you will, about the first years of your marriage, because the two of you wouldn't have looked like a likely couple to bring together, can I just say. So here you are, you've been exposed to some bad
dark
perceptions
hard
of
things,
love. You have been trying to be perfect to find love, and the two of you come together, and what happens?
Yeah, I think we realized, and that's what we talk about in the book, is that we almost kind of advocate for this third better way, we call it. And what I mean is kind of like I was more the prodigal son story, and she was kind of more in the more religious Pharisee side of things, being pressured and coerced by fear and pressure. But you realize that, hey, those rules aren't bad. Those the things you see in Scripture are actually God's vision for sexuality and marriage and love. But what we had to come to learn is that those are for our blessing. Those are for our flourishing, not just so that we might do them so we don't go to hell or something like that. And that was the big difference. Is I always talk about this phrase in the Old Testament where God always talks to Israel and says, obey this command, and then the next sentence is, so that it may go well for you. And that's that's why we should live in God's.
Sure,
Yeah, that's why we should live in God's way, is so that it may go well for us.
So, since we're talking about marriage, let's talk about another pressure that sometimes hits people unexpectedly. You're married for a while, you have 2 children now,
Yes.
and kids change things.
Yes.
Talk
Just a
about
little.
how that's happened.
You go to bed way
Alyssa.
earlier.
Yeah.
Well, we actually got pregnant 10 months in, so that was a
Yes.
huge surprise.
Great.
But I would honestly say having kids earlier, because we were on the 3 to 5 year plan, was actually so good for us. Because I feel like even when you're married, if you don't have kids, you can still be pretty independent, like still
Yes.
kind of do your own thing. You're still like sanctifying each other, but it's still pretty. But then when you have kids, it's like, wow, all of a sudden it's like,
Trial by fire.
yeah, and a lot of like how,
they're a blessing.
like truly serving the other so you can be a team.
Totally.
Or else, yeah, it goes hard.
So the title of your book is Love That Lasts. How do we get that?
And we
Good
made it-
question.
Yes, we kind of even made a joke in the book, I think, where I wish I almost tried to convince our publisher to make it "Love That Lasts?"
Yeah.
Because I mean, we don't know, like we need to also admit that.
You're on the journey.
Exactly. But I think what we talk about in the book is, but we've already seen, like what I mentioned, that it may go well for us, of like, us versus some of our friends. We already have some friends who are, porn is killing their marriage. They've already, already have a friend who's been divorced after 2 years of marriage. And we're starting to say, hey, we want to chase God's way. We want to follow Jesus in these things. And for us, we're starting to see this trajectory difference between us and some of our peers. And I think that just shows that when you live in God's way, you get that return on the blessing of like, oh, this is actually how I'm created to live and how we should be following in these things.
Well, there is a plan, and that's what this book is all about. It's the Bethke's book, but the plan is God's.
Yes, amen.
The title is called Love That Lasts. It's available wherever books are sold. It's a great read, and it'll give you some wonderful concepts of how you can make your love last. Plus, we have a social exclusive interview with Jeff and Alyssa. Watch that by going to facebook.com/700club.